our series of talks on the Gita titled Unveiling the Bhagavad-Gita. We will interpret each verse and apply it to our lives. As usual, before we begin, I will give a brief story. Many years ago, I was very fortunate to meet the head of state at one of our countries. And I was a very young man then. So I sat with him, very distinguished man, and I asked him, I said, "Sir, with all your experience as an attorney, a high court judge, an appeals court judge, and then president, what advice would you give to young people?" And his response to me was that there are so many people out here in this world with education, with cars, with homes, with families, but yet they don't know themselves. So I pondered on that statement for a bit, and I thought, how could that possibly be? So I inquired even further. I said, "Sir, forgive my ignorance, but how could one possess education, academic qualifications, that is, a home, a family, but yet not know who they are? Isn't it right that when we are all born, we are born with a birth paper, given a name, given a family name? Is it not true that we grow with family structures around us? Is it not true that our friends know us? How could you possibly say that we don't know who we are?" He looked at me with a smile. I guess he was anticipating such a question from a very young and inexperienced young man. And he gently told me, he said, "Son, many times we go about life believing ourselves to be the names that we are called, believing ourselves to be the positions that we hold. Sometimes we go about life believing ourselves to be what others believe us to be. But that doesn't make us known to our own selves. It is just an idea that is fed to us, that is given to us, that makes us believe we are this or we are that. We are name, we are job, we are resources, we are responsibilities, we are reputation. But is it really true that that is what we are?" And I sat there looking at this distinguished son of the soil, wondering to myself, do I know who I am? And that question remained with me for many years later on. Sometimes we go about life believing ourselves to be a role. A role is the position that we hold. Sometimes that role might be a father, or a mother, or a son, a teacher, a doctor, an attorney. And we assume that that role is descriptive of who we are. But the answer is that perhaps we are much more than a role. Probably we are the responsibilities, what we actually do. And what we actually do defines many of us. Some people live for their jobs. They live for their tasks, and they are defined by that. But those are still actions. Is it then possible that we are more than responsibilities? Then some of us believe that we might be defined by our resources, what we have, our possessions, our wealth, our acquisitions in life. And is that what we are? Or perhaps, is there something more? And that is a fundamental question, because our identity is not associated with our roles, nor our responsibilities, and it is definitely not associated with our resources. They are all very important aspects of our lives, needless to say. But the question is it then possible that we are much more than this? In today's session of the Bhagavad Gita, we begin with chapter 1, verse 1. It is quite interesting that Gita itself started with a question. It is very possible that a question could be the wrong question. Let's take a look at the Gita. The armies of the Kauravas and the Pandavas assume their battle formation in anticipation for the imminent clash of the righteous against the unrighteous. Skilled and experienced warriors stood on opposite sides of the moral divide. The hour of darkness had befallen the royal families. Arjuna was strategically positioned in the chariot in keen observation of the opposing forces. Instead of mustering the courage to proclaim the clarion call for arms, Arjuna became overwhelmed with dejection, discouragement, and doubt. This first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita exposes the mental torment of Arjuna, known as the yoga of Arjuna's anguish. Chapter 1 consists of 47 verses, which we will apportion into 6 sections as follows. The first section, section 1, we will call the question of the king, which is a topic we will deal with today. That's verse 1. Section 2 is a crisis of conscience, which we would look at from verses 2 to 11. Section 3, the sound of terror, which we would find between verses 12 to 19. Section 4, the dejection of Arjuna, which we will also find in verses 20 to 30. Section 5, Arjuna's invalid renunciation in verses 31 to 39. And section 6, Arjuna's collapse of courage, which is verses 40 to 47. Each section will be divided into the following. We will have the verse itself, which I will call the proclamation. Then we will move into the interpretation. And finally, we will move into the application. The Gita starts with a question. The wrong question cannot lead to the right answer. Like many aspects of life, a question must be asked. What should I study? What school or university should I attend? Who should I marry? How many children should I have? And the question goes on and on in all aspects of our lives. Before we can even identify a solution, a question must be asked to identify the problem. The Gita begins with a question. The blind king inquired of Sanjay. Verse 1 says, Sanjay, convened on the blessed land of Kurukshetra, eager to wage war, what are the actions of the sons of Pandu and my own sons? The king asked a question. Section 1, verse 1. A question inaugurates the divine discourse of the Gita. The blind king secured in the safety of his palace in Hastinapura, yet yearning for an insight into the affairs of the war. Sanjay conveyed what the king asked. Sanjay was conferred with the ability to remotely view the battle, and he was responsible for describing the events on the battlefield. Engulfed by the lust of power, the blind king eagerly sought the interest of the Kauravas. his own sons. The king had no interest in the welfare of virtues and justice. The blindness of the king was equally reflected in the blindness of his intelligence. The Kauravas, his sons, were driven by insatiable appetite for sovereignty and antagonism at the negative conditions of spiritual deterioration. The blind king magnetized towards the deficient and elements of a human spirituality, as the mind is effortlessly attracted towards the decadent attributes of life. The mind is in a state of total deprivation of righteousness when its reasoning faculties are blinded by self-interest, power, and prestige. In the study of Bhagavad-Gita, it is fundamental that we understand the basic philosophies of Vedanta before proceeding deeper into the ocean of wisdom contained in the following verses and chapters. Without understanding the elementary concepts and ideologies of Sanatana Dharma, the eternal principles, then it is equivalent to wearing the most expensive and exquisite jewelry, yet having no clothes. What is Vedanta? And that is the essential question. The question that the blind king asked was to see what was happening in the battlefield. He wanted to identify what was taking place between the sons of Pandu and his own sons, two cousins. But the king's interest was not on the welfare of others. He wanted to know what. He wanted to know where. But those are not the fundamental questions of life. The fundamental question cannot be what, because that is associated with the realm of matter and experiences in the world of objects. It cannot be where, because that is associated with time and space in the world of experiences and objects. The fundamental question that one should ask themselves is who? Who am I? When we dive deeper into the concept of Vedanta, these are the questions that we hope to answer. The Bhagavad-Gita is basically the total essence of Vedanta, the summary of the entire Upanishads. What is Vedanta? Vedanta is actually divided into two words. It's a Sanskrit word with Veda, knowledge, Anta, end. It is the end part of the knowledge or the total accumulation of all that we should know. It is sometimes referred to as the Upanishads. Sometimes it is referred to as the total concept of Sanatana Dharma, the totality of the philosophy of what we believe in. Veda, the knowledge, was given to us and transmitted to us by the rishis. The Upanishads expounded on the Vedas, and the Bhagavad-Gita brought together the entire essence of those Upanishads to us. In studying Gita, we study Vedanta. What then is the essence of the Upanishads that the Gita so magnificently summarizes? The essence of Upanishad is simply that I am. Let's take each part. That is in reference to the cosmic consciousness, or what we call the divine consciousness, or the God consciousness. It is that which knows no form. It has no name. There is no limitation. no restriction, no definition. It exists in time, space, and matter, and yet transcends time, space, and matter. It is vastness. It is infinitude. It is beyond the comprehension of man. The term infinitude or vastness is what we will call Brahman. There is no further definition of Brahman except it is Sat, Sit, Ananda. Existence, consciousness, bliss. The question, who am I, has absolutely nothing to do with our roles, our responsibilities, or even our resources. The question, who am I, has everything to do with the very nature of our being, the essence of Vedanta. In Advaita Vedanta, when we ask the question, who am I, we go beyond the concept of time, space, and matter. We enter into the transcendental state of that consciousness. The question that King Dasrath asked, the question that the blind king asked, had everything to do with his physical and mental condition. He was not at the level to understand the higher truth that was about to be revealed on that battlefield from the very lips of Sri Krishna to the air, the mind, and soul of Arjuna. The question that we should ask ourselves today is not where, it's not even why, and it's definitely not what. The question that we ask ourselves is, who am I? Unless we are able to answer that question, the question, who am I, is perhaps the most fundamental question we can ever ask ourselves. From our early childhood, we are taught everything. We are taught about identifying our hands, how to speak. We are taught what our names are. We enter into the school system, and then we are taught mathematics and the sciences. And then we enter into university and we are given degrees to do. And we are highly qualified academically, which is good. But very rare do we stop and ask ourselves that most fundamental question, who am I? In the 1950s, that very question was asked to Bhagwan Ramana Maharishi. And he said something of great interest. He said that the question, who am I, is actually not meant to be answered. It is meant to dissolve the questioner. What did Bhagwan Maharishi meant by that? He actually meant that by asking yourself that question, the further you go into your own self, into your own nature, to unfold, to remove that which you are not, until you reach the point to identify that which you are. This former head of state that I spoke to, that is basically what he was trying to tell me. We go about our lives not identifying who we are. And in so doing, we live in utter confusion. We are trapped in this world of pain and pleasure, of happiness and sadness, of honor and dishonor. And we are tossed to and fro in this world because we have not yet come to that mental place of quietude, which is identifying our own selves. Who am I? Many years ago, Swami Chinmayananda gave a beautiful story. He said that once humankind is able to identify themselves as Sat Chit Ananda, as existence, consciousness, bliss, we are able to no longer be thrown from one end to the other, between the pairs of opposites, between pain and pleasure, joy and sorrow. We are no longer tossed to and fro like a log in the sea, but instead, we stand like a lighthouse, according to Swami Chinmayananda. We stand strong, overlooking the ocean, and the light from the lighthouse, beaming for all to see, that illuminates the ocean. The waves come and break at the foot of the lighthouse, but it stands strong because it knows what it is. When we identify who we are, which we will as we go deeper and deeper into the ocean of the Bhagavad-Gita, we will become that lighthouse that stands strong, that stands still. We will be able to face the challenges of life, not from a position of ignorance, but from a position of knowledge. We will move from darkness into light, and we will stand strong on the eternal principles delivered on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, from the supreme consciousness to all of humankind. This message is not meant for any one particular religion, race, creed, ethnic group, or those with economic status, but is meant for all human beings, from child until the golden years. This is the eternal message of Vedanta. This is the eternal message of the Bhagavad-Gita. Today we looked at verse 1 in chapter 1, the question. We conclude by saying one more time, if we ask the wrong question, do not expect the right answer. The fundamental question is, who am I? I am Dr. Roger Gopaul. Thank you for joining me here again today, and looking forward to seeing you in our next session, where we will further pursue our quest in the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you very much. Namaste.